Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being a part of our 12th virtual event organized by Women Test Bangalore chapter. And I'm Shruti, the chapter leader for Women Test Bangalore, and I'll be your host for the day. And I work with Trigent. Talking about Women Test, it is an initiative to improve the diversity in the testing and the tech world. It aims to equip the testers with the power of knowledge. And talking about Trigent, which hosts the webinars. Trigent is a 25-year-old technology company that enables business to embrace their digital future. It helps clients to overcome its limits by leveraging the technology. We are happy to share that Trigent recently won the Best Agile Project at the prestigious North American Software Testing Awards 2020. Talking about our webinar topic, in 2016, an engineer, Peter Thomas, noticed that something amiss in the test, the way the test would fail randomly. So convinced that there's a better approach for troubleshooting the problem was really possible. Then he decided to develop a solution. The effort was to, in the result of the effort leaded in the creation of karate, which is a test framework, automation test framework. So over within just 4 years of duration, karate's success is evident, and how it turns up in the blogs, the social media mentions, and the job listing and tech conference worldwide. So today we have in our webinar today, we'll be hearing more about karate straight from the creator. So it gives me immense pleasure to invite Peter Thomas as our speaker for the day. So thank you so much for your acceptance, and we welcome you for the webinar today, Peter.
Hey, thank you, Shruti. Thank you so much, and it's great to be here, and thanks for that very kind introduction. I hope I'm clear and that you can hear me. So
yes, you are clear.
Awesome. So let's do this then. Just
so without further ado, Peter, I am letting you to take over. So the presenter rights is with you now. So I think you can carry on. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we're all set. Thanks. Welcome everyone to the session. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend this. I'm Peter. I created the karate test automation framework around 4 years back, and I currently work at Intuit. I've been at Intuit for 4 years. It's been great. Not 4 years, actually 8 years, and 4 years has been all about karate. So I'm going to talk to you a lot about that. And if you are on social media, those the last line on the slide has my Twitter ID, and you can even follow the project on Twitter using the karate DSL ID. So please, you can note that if needed. All right. So what is karate? I think most of you would have heard of it, at least by getting into the session, of course. It is an open source framework. It started out as only for API test automation. And as I would like to talk through in this session, it does quite a lot. It has evolved to do all kinds of things beyond API testing, which I'm sure all teams are interested in and need. I use the term DSL that's there on the third bullet on the slide, and it stands for domain specific language. Why I think of karate as a domain specific language, I'll try to make that clear in the next couple of slides. And one more thing which is very important, and I make sure I call out, is karate may look very similar to Cucumber, specifically Gherkin. So if you have experience with Cucumber, I just want to make a note that karate is not a BDD framework. It looks very much like it, but you should think of karate as a programming language. And your takeaways from this session should be that, hey, karate is not just for API testing, but it can do API mocking. It can do performance testing, which is pretty cool. So, pay attention to that. And last but not the least, karate can actually do UI automation. So yes, if you're wondering whether karate can compete with the usual suspects like Selenium and maybe even Cypress, yes, we have a story to tell there, and I'm going to show you a demo of what is possible with karate. In case you have the question that whether karate is being used, is it popular, are actually people using it, and how many companies are using it, I think the answer is a big yes. Very, very positive feedback for the last 4 years, karate has evolved certainly. And as you can see on the slide, ThoughtWorks, they have this Tech Radar, which is a very, I thoroughly recommend if you haven't seen the ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. It comes out every quarter, and it is a great way to keep up to date with, the latest and greatest and all the best practices that evolve or are, already mature. So as you can see, karate was initially rated as assess, and then, hopefully within the next year or two, we would actually end up in the center of that bullseye that you see on the right over there. Great. So before I show you a code sample, I just want to set a little bit of context and also talk about, why APIs are so important, or why you see a lot of APIs today, in my particular twist. I'm sure all of you know what APIs are, but the typical experience of APIs that you have today as a user of websites, like be it Amazon, Flipkart, Google and whatnot, Google Mail, you have this front end, and I'm sure all of you are well aware of all these technologies like React, Vue, Angular, and most web applications today, and let me just talk about web applications for a minute. Most web applications today have this very heavy front end. There's a lot of JavaScript that gets, pulled to the browser when you navigate to a page, and you've heard the term single page applications, obviously. But what's happening is that this JavaScript, and you can see on this picture, there's that green blob, would make a bunch of HTTP requests. You see get and post, and what comes back from the server, and yes, that's your invocation of a web service, typically REST, and you would have heard of GraphQL and all that. You get back JSON, and then that front end, Angular or React or whatever, would massage that into HTML and then show it back to the end user, right? But that's where services figure, in the whole end-to-end picture of, all those daily experiences that you have navigating websites and, shopping carts and whatnot. So where does karate fit into this whole picture? You can see that karate can just replace whatever calls these services, make the get and post requests, get the JSON back, and do assertions on that, right? This is one of the reasons most of you know that API testing is so important, because you kind of bypass that whole somewhat convoluted stack of the UI and the browser, and and it is very well known that API tests are much more reliable, faster to run, and less flaky than the usual UI automation end-to-end tests that you might be used to. So a lot of companies now realizing that, API testing is the better place in the whole test pyramid to focus your energy. I completely endorse that. I have been working on automation for a while, and I really find it very hard to do UI automation. So API test automation, there's a lot of good things going for it. You can run it in parallel, which I will talk about, which is one of the biggest selling points of karate. So apologies if you have seen the slide before, but I think it's worth to get grounded with why karate is different. And I think the first takeaway, and yes, I'm showing you right now a hello world example. The primary thing that you might feel when you see the slide is that this is not any programming language that you are used to. It's not Java, it's not C#, it's not Python, it's not Ruby, it's not JavaScript. It is this weird language. And yes, I think a lot of you would have now seen given, when, then, and on the leftmost word on each line. That is Cucumber, but that is stolen from Cucumber in a sense. But it's very important for you to understand that that is just for decoration in a sense. It makes the test more readable, makes it look good in a sense. A lot of people like it, but that's that. And getting to the details, one of the biggest selling points of karate is that it handles JSON kind of natively. And if you have used a programming language like Java or C#, you might have encountered the situation where you want to put some JSON into your test, but you have to do all that ugly escaping of double quotes or the backslash and all that. You don't have that problem here. And even better, you can see that if I use my mouse cursor, you can see that the key does not need quotes around it, and single quotes are sufficient. This is great. This is exactly how JavaScript programmers deal with JSON on a daily basis. And as you will hear me talk through this, you might realize that I'm a big fan of JSON now. JSON is one of the best ways to represent data, and it's so elegant. You can see it's human readable, like you can say name is equal to Billy, and so on. I just love the fact that you just put a curly brace and you're just working with pure data. Um, I use the term domain-specific language, and this is why. And I want you to focus your attention quickly on the second word on each line, and I'll use my mouse to highlight it. URL, request, method, status, and path. And you know what? These terms, these words, request, method, URL, path, would straight away make a lot of sense to anyone working in the domain of HTTP or REST. It just makes sense. Karate is so crisp, with just these simple words, you can see this test at a glance. Very readable, very less noise. There's no semicolon nonsense like you have in other languages, and it reads well, which is great for maintainability. And I will say this that we've had many product owners, people who are non-technical, able to actually contribute to the test cases that teams are working on, and that's a great thing. I won't advertise karate as such, but in reality, people are actually able to get that benefit. And as I said earlier, karate is not a BDD framework. It's not really designed for non-technical users as the primary customer, but it works. What you see here is probably one of the biggest selling points of karate, and this is really what makes karate different from other frameworks or other approaches to test APIs, which is in one line, you are validating that whatever response came back from the server, and keep in mind that these responses would be typically very, very complicated. When you're doing some real work, when you're calling some business API, customer billing address, customer list, you can have nested JSON, you can have lists and arrays of JSON, and it can get really complicated. But no matter what, karate is great at this, which is in one line, you can actually assert that all the data values in the JSON that came back are as expected. And again, I keep repeating myself, the primary role of you as a test automation person for APIs is that is the data as expected. And karate really does a great job, and there's a twist. You can pay attention to this hash not null happening here, and this is a big deal. This is again one of the pain points when you test APIs, which is in many cases what you get back from the server would be random or not predictable. Examples are UUIDs, identifiers, or timestamps or date stamps. And the great thing is that karate is able to it enables you to actually say that, hey, I want to test all the data values except these one or two data values that are troublesome. And it just works. People love karate for that. And last but not the least, you never test an API in isolation. You would always chain, you would make a call to one API, get back some data, and then take some of that data and then plug it in and form a new JSON and make yet another request, and that goes on. And all of you who are testing APIs probably know that invariably the first call that you would make would be maybe to your SSO system, where you do a sign-in, you get some token, and then you have to use that token for all the subsequent calls that you make. And karate is really good at that. It actually has special constructs to make that whole header management easy when you have to have this authorization header for multiple requests. Again, something which I don't see many other frameworks solve well. Karate has a very good story for that. So with that, let me show you a demo. And a reminder, I think there is a question option in the webinar settings that you have. We will take questions at the end. There would be time for questions. In fact, I really hope to at least set apart 20 minutes for questions. That's where the fun is. So feel free to ask me anything related to karate, and I'll try my best to cover that at the end. The demo that I have is in Visual Studio Code, and let me take a minute to say why that is important. And you would have seen in the run-up to this webinar, this event, that there's been a mention of karate being very easy for non-technical or people who don't have a background in programming. The fact that karate is actually easy for such people to pick up and be up and running. And believe me, we've seen this actually work out in practice time and time again. And what you're looking at is Visual Studio Code. Most of you would have heard of this. This is, surprisingly in the last few years, kind of risen to the top ranks of IDEs. In the past, people used to always talk about Eclipse and NetBeans and IntelliJ, but Visual Studio Code is now here, and it's a strong force in the world of developers and developer productivity. So the good news is that Visual Studio Code has first-class support for karate. In fact, let me show you the karate extension. The karate runner, 10,000 downloads. This is, by the way, I never fail to marvel at the magic of open source. I have never met Kirk, who created this plugin. This has all happened just because of open source collaboration, and he created this plugin. It's really widely used. And the best part about this plugin and Visual Studio Code, again, for the benefit of those who may be coming into karate without much programming knowledge, is that you don't need to compile any code. You don't need to know anything about Java. You can open a text file like this, and you have syntax coloring and all the stuff that you expect from an IDE. And you can see here, there's this very helpful karate run button, right? In the Visual Studio world, this is called as a code lens, I believe. But whatever it's called, it just means that you can just put your mouse here, click, and actually run this test. What is this test doing? Yes, it's obviously going to http://bin.org, which is actually a public URL, and making this request body and actually validating whether the response contains. And you can see there's another way to do assertions in karate, which is contains. Again, very useful, because most of the time you don't need to look at all the JSON. You just want some subset of the JSON that comes back to be validated, and karate is really good at that. So does karate have good reports? The answer is, you guessed it, yes, a big yes. One of the great things about the karate report is that it would show in line in the HTML report what request was made all the way to this public URL in this case, and what came back, which is this somewhat complicated JSON. And that's a test. Very simple. You don't need to write any code. There's no compilation. You just click the button. You have this nice IDE, and you have nice reports at the end. If you're wondering, what happens if you have a failure, let me quickly demonstrate that. I'm going to introduce a typo in my assertion. So if I rerun this, the test is going to fail. And if I open the report, that's an example of a failure. And one of the nice things about karate is that it actually does a great job. Of course, this has evolved over time. It does a great job in telling you exactly which level of a highly nested JSON failed. This is the path, and this is what was expected, and this is what actually came, and this is what was expected. So I think you've got a good summary of what karate does, what it does well. And specifically, I just want to repeat the point that karate is great if you don't have any prior programming knowledge, right? And let me get rid of my video for a minute. I just want to show you one more thing, the zip release. This is very important for those specifically. And of course, some of you may be looking interested in asking how do you use karate with Java. That's the standard expected answer. Karate is a library that's there on Maven. But for the benefit of those who just want to use karate as this one executable and don't want to install too many things, please look out for the zip release. It should be easy to find this. It's definitely there from the karate homepage. By the way, this is the karate homepage, showing a lot of nice activity. A reminder is, please add a star to the GitHub page if you haven't already, because that really helps us be motivated and It helps in various things for the project. One more thing I just want to quickly call out while I'm here is that Karate is showing all signs of healthy contributions from not just me. I certainly am the primary contributor, but there's a whole lot of other folks now involved, as you expect from an open source project. So the zip release is something which is, you just download this one zip file, you extract it to any directory you want. You most likely have Java installed, and by the way, you don't need the JDK, just the Java runtime environment is sufficient. And then you install Visual Studio, it's just going to work. So I think we're doing quite good on time. So the second thing I want to talk about is performance testing. And this is one of the reasons why you should really consider Karate. And this is something that Karate does very well, in my very biased opinion, of course. So hang on, let me bring this guy up for a while. How have you typically done performance testing in the past? If you think about this, most likely it is that you've written a nice bunch of functional tests, and then a few days before your release, someone panics and comes. There's a lot of pandemonium and people running here and there because you haven't done performance testing and you have no idea whether your system is going to scale and all that. And then somebody calls in a SWAT team, and this team knows how to use some specific tools. It's typically JMeter or Gatling or Locust and whatnot. And they have to rewrite all those lovely scenarios that you already probably have in yet another tool. Let's say it's JMeter, and then you run JMeter and then you get your reports, right? And haven't you always wondered that why can't I just take my existing tests and multiply it with some load factor and get my performance test reports, right? And that is what Karate gives you. You see here that you can take your existing tests, just apply a load model, which is the multiplication factor that you can expect. 100 users or 1 million users, depending on your hardware capabilities and all that. And at the end, you get this lovely report. And let me show you a demo of what this looks like. And while doing this demo, I'm also going to talk about mocking, because I don't have time to do a specific demo for mocking. So by the way, yeah, this is IntelliJ. So if you're wondering how does a Karate test look like in a Java IDE, here's your answer. Reasonably good syntax coloring, definitely the same things that you can do. You can actually click on a scenario, right click and say run scenario and all that. Not going to do this here. I just want to switch to a different project, which is a Gatling project. Okay, and before I run this, and it's going to be fun, you're going to see the report and this whole scenario run on my local machine. Two things I want to call out is I'm going to use a mock. By the way, this is a mock, and one thing about the mock is that we are going to simulate a delay of 850 milliseconds for specifically the delete method that is coming in. Again, I've suddenly switched gears. This is mocking I'm talking about. So mocking is the 180 degree reverse of API HTTP clients, which is what we talked about so far. So Karate has this whole other capability, which is API mocking. And if you see this script, it's actually quite remarkable that Karate is able to handle a get to /cats, a get to /cat/id. And whatever I'm highlighting, all of you who have familiarity with how do you implement REST on the server would be able to make out what's happening here. But your takeaway is that in very surprisingly few lines of code, you as someone who's working maybe in the quality or the quality engineering side of things, you with Karate have the power to do 10 times faster the act of creating a REST API for the sake of testing, of course, in this case. But you can do it 10 times faster than a developer who's working on technologies like Tomcat, Flask, Node, Node.js Express, and so on, right? AWS Lambda, you name it, which is pretty cool. So I leave it to you to actually go and do some reading about karate mocking, because it's very important, especially when you want to test microservices and you have services that depend on other services which you don't own. And that's where you can use mocks. Mocks are, in a way, kind of a stubbing, and yeah, the word mock hopefully makes it clear. The selling point of karate and the Gatling integration. So I'm talking about Gatling here because Gatling is the integration that we use, the particular open source project that we use for load testing. I'm sure all of you have heard of it, but and Gatling is a great tool, but the point here is that because karate has this lovely integration, where earlier, and I can actually show you quickly what a normal Gatling test would look like. You actually have to learn Scala and shape all these requests, right? This is how you express JSON in Scala, and the moment you want to parameterize JSON, which you need to do, and I'm sure some of you would have questions on data-driven testing and how that works in karate, and there's a very, very good answer to that. And you can see this is how you do assertions in Scala. You can see you're doing a lot of work where karate, remember, you had that match keyword where you could just validate whether the JSON is yes or no correct in just one step. And of course, I have to say that Scala is not a trivial language to learn. It's actually quite complex. And you can see how complex this test has become when you want to do a loop and so on. So the great thing about the karate option is that you just refer to existing tests. Look at this. We are just pointing to an existing feature file, and I can open that feature file, and that feature file is just a normal karate test. By the way, we have also introduced a deliberate error in the test, and you'll see what's going to happen when I actually run this example. So I'm going to do that Maven test at the bottom. I've just typed it in, and this is going to run. And because guess what, we're using karate mocks, this test, whatever I'm running, will actually work even though my network card is pulled out, which I'm not going to do obviously because we're connected in a webinar. But you get the point. That's one of the great things about mocks. It allows you to do all these weird tests, and you remember that one part of this test is actually going to validate a delay from the server side of 800 milliseconds. Gatling has just finished. I'm going to cut and paste the URL here into a new browser. There we go. Gatling's reports are, of course, amazing. A lot of experts have really put their life's work into Gatling reports in a sense. And the first thing I want to show you is that if I explode, and yes, grouping in Gatling is all supported by karate, you can see that the delete method, right? The delete method is taking 800 milliseconds because of our mock, right? And remember I said we introduced an error. One of the great things about the karate to Gatling integration is that any errors that happen in the karate side, you will see the line number of the whichever karate test failed in the Gatling report. So it's kind of a tight integration. Obviously, a lot of engineering work went in to make this happen, but there you go. That's karate and Gatling. And again, you can actually achieve this pretty compelling option on the right, which is reuse your existing functional tests as performance tests. I think this is one of the reasons many teams choose karate, and one of the reasons hopefully that you may consider or at least evaluate karate for your testing needs. Great. So I will take a minute to pause and see what the questions look like. Okay, good. There are a fair amount of questions. So I shall try to wind up in actually 10 minutes and get into questions, because as I said, feel free, again, those of you who haven't typed in your questions, just go ahead. We would be tackling them at the end in a few minutes from now. So the point I'm trying to drive on this slide Of course, besides the fact that you have this very pretty report option in Karate, is that Karate can call Java code. And the reason this is important is that in many cases, in many other test frameworks, especially test frameworks, and I know some of you may have experimented with keyword-driven frameworks, or maybe tried to create a Cucumber option for testing in your project teams. And in my experience, and this is what I've observed, right, in many times, you would encounter some edge case or some extremely complex to test scenario that the framework simply doesn't support, or you need a new keyword which doesn't exist, or the framework is just limited, right? There's only some things you can do with Cucumber. If you need to do more, you have to write a lot of code, or it's simply not possible. And the great thing about Karate is that Karate, because behind the scenes it uses a JavaScript engine, and that's a separate topic altogether. But if you look at this line number 4 on the slide, we are actually loading a Java class from the class path. And by the way, you can even call new if you want, but this Java class has some static methods on it. We are calling one of these methods called process, and we have defined that as a function on the fly. And some of you must be wondering, what is this arrow operator? And those of you who know JavaScript would realize that that is a JavaScript function. It's an anonymous JavaScript function. And the takeaway from the slide, and you can see we just had to do these 2 lines of gluing together some existing Java code and writing a function on the fly to make that Java class or Java code that you have written accessible to your test. And now look at what your test is doing. We're just saying FB invoke a method with a parameter 1. We're doing an assertion in the same line, which is pretty cool. And for those of you who had the question, how does Karate do data-driven testing? The answer is at the bottom half of this test script. There is something called a scenario outline that some of you would be familiar with. It comes from the Cucumber world. Yeah, you can create this human-friendly table, which is one of the great things about Cucumber and something that Karate obviously inherits. Express your data as a table, and at runtime, each row of the table would be looped over and your test executes, right? And all the variable substitutions just work. You see how elegantly the value here is converted to a number, 1, 3, 5, and 15. They even show up in the report. You can see on the right side, the report headings, use placeholders, this dollar substitution, this curly brace stuff actually works. And this is an example of some of the very cool things that Karate can do, for lack of a better word. And to repeat the takeaway for teams listening and for those who are wondering about Karate and why you should use Karate is that number 1, Karate can be extended very easily by Java code. And remember, this is one of the philosophical differences between Karate and Cucumber, right? Because in the Cucumber world, some of you know, you have to go into this somewhat convoluted process of writing glue code and then step definitions and then connect that step definitions to your test and all that. And Karate doesn't bother. Just load a Java class. You start using that Java class. You have the freedom to write JavaScript code in your feature file, which is crazy. And I'm sure the Cucumber guys hate me for doing that. But yeah, it just allows you to do this very deep testing, which you need to do because testing, as you all know, can get really hard. And Karate, again, the selling point is it tries to make all these things simpler. And this is an example of what it looks like. Finally, I'll spend the next 5 minutes doing a demo of UI testing. And here is the test that I'm going to run. I'll just explain what this test is going to do. This, yeah, and for those of you wondering, this is a browser-based test. This is the equivalent of what tools like Selenium and Cypress can do. It's going to go to github.com, attempt to log in with a ID that doesn't work. You'll get an error message. We're actually going to validate for whether the screen contains this error message. That's the one line in which we do that. We even take a screenshot, which I'll try to show in the report. The second part of the test goes to Google, types in karate DSL, and this just checks, clicks the search button, and we validate whether we landed on the karate GitHub homepage. So I'm going to run this. So what's going to happen is that you're going to see Chrome start to come up. Yeah, you can see the taskbar on my Mac. That's the error message. We've gone to Google. I'm completely hands-free, as you can see. So yeah, the test worked. Let's look at the report. There is the report. Yeah, screenshot looking pretty good. And there you go. But I think this is the part I really wanted to show off in the session. See this red dot over here? Yeah, I've hovered over it. It says it's a breakpoint. I'm going to rerun what I just ran in debug mode. And let's see what happens. Yes, everything's come up, and then bang, we have stopped. You can see the ID is saying that we have actually stopped at the breakpoint. And okay, I'm going to hide the window because that's going to get in the way. And let me just rearrange the screen a little bit just to show off a couple of things. And yeah, so we are here. And the great thing about debug mode is, number one, everything's frozen. So if you are if you are someone who typically does a lot of work testing web applications, you know that you invariably need to do view source like I'm doing here and look at all the HTML, right, which you can do while everything is very conveniently paused. I'm also going to interact with the screen. You can see what I'm typing. You can pay attention to the bottom of the screen. I'm going to say highlight login field. And if you watch the right of the screen, you can see you're able to kind of interact with the page right there. I can also define variables, foo is equal to like, and what happens is that you should see the variable in scope. Not sure what actually happened there, but okay, I will move on because yeah, the cool thing here is that you can actually go back in time. So if I hit this button, step back, I can actually replay the step, right? And here's the best part. Let me make a change here. I'm going to say hello as the password. In fact, that's not going to be obvious. So let me change this line. Okay, and let me just clear this from the right side. And when I hit this green button here, it's actually going to do a hot reload of the screen. And if I now play, yes, you see that without restarting the whole test, we were able to actually make a change in the test script. And this is great, right? By the way, yeah, that whole variable substitution I did has appeared a little late, but the point is that you can actually modify variables in your test again in debug mode. And remember, we are actually paused here. We actually went back in time and restarted. We didn't restart the test, but we were able to replay a couple of steps, and even better, we were able to actually change the test script on the fly and do a hot reload. Now, I'm sure some of you are grasping the implications of this. This is obviously a very, very cool thing technically, because what it means for you as someone who's into test automation is that you no longer need to, rerun your entire test suite. Maybe you've done some very convoluted login and sign in at the start, and it takes a long time. And you're trying to just fix this problem in your test, which is at the end of your test suite. And you spend your whole day just restarting and waiting for everything to come to that point, and then make a fix, trial and error, and then see if it works. And you can see exactly how karate solves this. And keep in mind that this going back in time business, you can't do this with normal programming languages like JavaScript, and there are a lot of tools that use JavaScript. You can't do this in Java, Python, Ruby, you name it. This is very specific to the way karate is engineered and the whole steps design of karate. So I really wanted to show you this demo because it hopefully gives you an idea of some of the possibilities that karate makes possible in a sense. So just to sum up, you already saw this slide, this picture on the left, but I just want to point out one of the other interesting implications, because karate started as an API testing framework, but we adopted, we expanded in a sense to UI automation. So any UI, as I said in the start, would call some services in order to show you some UI user experience. And the point I'm trying to make on the slide is that because you can now combine API tests and UI tests, and you can actually write these tests in the same single unified test script, you can do this amazing hybrid testing, which is you can make calls to your services using karate, and you have karate mocks, so that if there's some parts of your UI that are very troublesome and you don't want to use production stuff, you can actually stub them out. And if I rephrase what I just said, it means that whatever normally people do for unit testing, like mocks and even API testing, like I showed you a mock, you may be able to actually start doing mocking for user interface elements. So karate makes that possible. And I leave it to you to figure out the possibilities and experiment. But one of the typical use cases is that, the login process for any application is typically time consuming, right? You have to enter username, switch focus to another text box, which is your password, click the submit button, and then something happens, and then you navigate to your dashboard. But what we see teams do because of this hybrid option that you now get with karate is that you can make a sign-in to your single sign-in store, get your authorization token, use that to create cookies that automatically log you into your homepage or your dashboard, and you actually save a lot of time. So this is what we recommend as best practice. Use APIs to get your authorization tokens or cookies set up. It's very easy to create a cookie on the page using karate the UI syntax, and you save a lot of time. And I thoroughly recommend that as your aspiration when you're actually writing a whole bunch of UI tests. And finally, this is my last slide before we can get into questions or Q&A. This is where karate is today, right? And I'm personally quite amazed about the fact that we started out just doing the small box at the bottom left, API testing, but over time and with the help of the community and with a lot of feedback and with some of my peculiar obsession with trying to write an automation framework that is actually better than the ones out there. We have landed here where we actually have API testing, test doubles or mocks, web browser automation, which I showed you an example of. I won't talk about mock servlets. It's a very unique edge case in case you are still using heavyweight application servers like BA, WebLogic, or IBM WebSphere, and spending a lot of time rebooting these. You should look at this option. Performance testing is the Gatling stuff which I talked about. And yes, I didn't talk about this yet, but in case teams, or maybe you yourself as your team are doing a lot of Windows desktop application automation, please take a look at karate. This is a space which I've realized desperately needs more open source or more free options. Some of you may know that WinApp driver, which used to be something Microsoft is developing, is actually on hiatus. That project is kind of paused, and there's a lot of uncertainty about whether that project continues. So please, we need more help to actually make this more robust in a sense. It's being used in my organization, and I know a couple other places using it. It's somewhat new, but please, do spread the word about karate can do Windows application testing. It can do mobile testing as well, but you can see Appium testing is kind of hidden away here. But full disclosure, it's not 100% mature, but it's very close. So again, yeah, I should say this. This is a very passionate request from me, a very earnest request to all of you listening. Please contribute to karate in some form. It's an open source project. I'm based out of Bangalore, so you can think of karate as this very Indian open source project, and there are not many of them. And so with that, yes, I think I'm done with my main presentation. And if I open out the box, let me hand it back to the organizers. And Trijant, thank you for setting this up again. And Shruti, back to you for the questions.
Thank you, Peter. It was such a nice session, informative. Yeah, so we can pitch up for the questions now. So first question, it states that, Peter, is it okay to minimize your video? Okay. I don't think so. It was an issue going further. Only in the first slide, I mean, your one part of it was covering. So yeah, later to that, it was not a problem. So I don't think so, audience would have faced any issue going further. The next question states that, hi Peter, do you have any plans for mobile app testing both for Android and iOS? I think your last part answered that, where you stated about the API usage and all for mobile testing.
Yes. I think we can move on. I think I made that clear. Mobile testing is possible. There are teams using it. It's definitely ready for, I think, 80 to 95% of use cases. And again, we are very close. So, whoever asked question, Mohammed, I think, please, try it out, give us some feedback, and it'll be great if you can contribute as well. We do need people to, I mean, the more people who pitch in, the faster we'll get there. So yeah, that's my answer about mobile.
Okay, yeah. So there's one more question which states that how karate is different from Postman.
Yeah, great question. I obviously get this question a lot. So how do I start? Number one, see, karate is definitely a little code oriented, where Postman is this UI based framework. Yes, they do have a story for CI, where you have to export your collection and run Newman in order to get it to CI and CD. But because of that, I'll highlight two places where I think karate is better. And again, take what I'm saying with a pinch of salt, obviously. But number one, if you need to chain requests, right? If you need to do data-driven testing and you need to take the output of some response and then put it into the next request, it's actually quite hard in Postman. Data-driven testing gets harder just because of that. And one of the questions you should ask yourself, right? If you want to do parallel testing, when you get your final report back, is it aggregated? And I don't think Postman has an answer for that. So my third point is that I think Postman has a weakness in the sense, if you want to do parallel testing, which is very important, because remember, UI automation and API automation is an area where you actually need to run your tests as fast as possible, because by nature, API tests, for example, because you're making this call to a remote endpoint, you're making a call over the network, and there is a lot of time spent for data to go and come back. API tests are slow. Each response typically takes around the average of 300 to 500 milliseconds again. So one of karate's selling points is parallel test execution. You can look it up. In Postman, you may be able to do parallel execution with a lot of hacking, but at the end, I don't think there's a good option for you yet to aggregate the reports. I have to mention that Postman does not support WebSocket testing, so that's another known weakness. It's been an open issue on the Postman site for a long time. So there is more, but hopefully this gives you the main highlights with regards to that question. Thanks, Ravi.
So going for the next question, they're asking to share the recording. Yes, all the attendants would be getting the recording within 1 to 2 days. So yeah, a recording would be sent to your email address. So the next question is, what are the advantages of karate over rest assured?
Yes, I actually have a slide for that, so let me bring that up. Again, a somewhat common question. So no Java coding, parallel execution is not supported in rest assured. It's kind of partially done. It's a little controversial, but I leave you to be the judge. There are some areas in rest assured that don't handle parallelization very well. You have to add on a lot of things if you want to do things like data-driven testing. For example, you need to mix test-ng. If you want to do assertions, you have to use Hamcrest or JSert or whatever. Remember, one of the things with karate is that it's a one-stop shop. You don't need to typically mix in anything other than maybe some small sets of JavaScript code or Java code. But assertions, the whole match of karate is built in, right? You don't need to go and use another framework. And you can't modify JSON, which is very weird in REST assured, because you typically need to get some JSON and then modify it. WebSocket support is not there. Mocking support is not there. You need to add another framework like WireMock. And obviously, Karate's big selling point is that you can reuse tests as performance tests. If you have, and there's a whole lot more. In fact, I spent a lot of time because this was one of the biggest questions I used to keep getting when Karate was very new and people were expectedly, kind of, skeptical about whether Karate is a good framework and all that. So I spent a lot of time creating this big document that, there's a link at the top right of the slide, which I invite you to go and look at. It's also linked from our homepage on the GitHub repository. So there's a lot more of this data. So if you're trying to kind of make a case for Karate in your organization where you might be using REST assured, and I know there's a lot of teams using REST assured and kind of happy with it for a long time, please, feel free to reach out in case you want to have more questions, but there is a lot of documentation for you to go through. So hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, yeah. So next question goes like, can Karate be used for gRPC test and or the mock-ins?
Yes, the answer is yes. The reason is because Karate, and by the way, I'm also showing you Stack Overflow, which is one of the best places to get support for Karate. So if I do a search for gRPC, for example, how to integrate, get a duplicate, and so the good news is that someone has even written a third-party project for this. So I leave it to you to evaluate whether this Karate gRPC project, which is not our project, it's a third-party project, is sufficient. Most likely it would fit for simple cases, but my recommendation is that if Karate-gRPC doesn't work, it's very simple. You just write a Java class. Remember, I showed you that slide that Karate is very good at, integrating with Java code. And all you need to do is just, write a one-time utility that takes JSON, converts it to gRPC, makes the call. Whatever comes back from gRPC, return it back as JSON. And the moment you have JSON, Karate will do the rest of the, things you really want to do, which is asserting whether all the data is coming back in the right shape and so on. So there are many teams. My organization itself is using gRPC and Karate. Karate also has a way in which you can do asynchronous invocation and wait for messages and all that. So please do check it out. And again, if you have questions, just use Stack Overflow. And other than me, there are people actually monitoring it, and you're likely to get pretty fast, helpful answers. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So next one is we are using scenario outline and the test data is an example. Like, so if we have 10,000 data, so is there any effective way to write test cases without writing 1,000 times in Karate? Do we have anything as such as the question? Is there any efficient way to test it?
Yes, I got the question. Yeah, by the way, you see me scrolling through. The reason I'm scrolling through like this is because the webinar toolbars are in the way. So, but let me. So obviously, I was kind of showing off that Karate has a lot of documentation. It's quite surprising for an open source project actually. Here's the answer to your question. You can use a JSON file or a CSV file. In fact, I do have an example here. So this is a big twist that Karate does to the scenario outline. You can actually load tabular data dynamically that may come from a file, a CSV file, or even created by a function. You can actually, for example, this test is actually generating an array of JSON with 20 rows and passing that to a scenario outline. And you talked about a scenario outline in your question, and it just works. Let me show you the CSV example. So yeah, we read a CSV file as the data source. So I think that should answer your question. So Karate has really, really good story for number one, data-driven testing. But to specifically answer your question, yeah, if you have 1,000 data, put it into a CSV file or a JSON file, which is probably a little better, and Karate will do the rest. And last but not the least, those 1,000 rows, Karate can and will execute them in parallel. So, we have a pretty good story for that.
Okay. So how is Karate handling the before and after tests? So it's maybe like the test ng framework that has a
Yeah.
lot of after and before setup for the tests.
Yes, so the short answer is here. I'm again showing you a section of the documentation. We have hooks. We even have a hook that can fire before all tests, which is very important because typically teams use that for, you need to make this authorization call, get your authorization header values, the token, and then use that for all your tests that would run in parallel. And we have that. You can use the background. I think those of you who are familiar with Cucumber already know that the background fires before each scenario. If you want a background that fires only once, yes, we have call once. We can do after scenario. And if you need something beyond this, we have a Java set of interceptors. As you can expect with any kind of framework like this, we have, if you really want to dive into code, if you know Java, you can take it to the next level. And we know that teams are using that particular integration. For example, if you're using a reporting system like, I forgot the names, Extent Report or Allure, and you want to submit your test reports to those systems while your tests continuous integration jobs run and all that, you can do that using these kind of hooks, as we call it. So I think, yeah, that should answer that question, I hope.
Okay, so next question is there a way to test the WebSocket handlers using Karate? I know WebSockets are different from traditional APIs. I assume the answer is no, but just wanted to know if there is any open source plugin available to test WebSocket calls in the backend.
No, good news. We have, as I said, right, this is actually one of the, maybe you put the question before I talked about Postman. One of the differences we have, advantages we have over Postman, we have native WebSocket support. Please check it out. And yes, it is, remember, WebSockets means it's async, and we have support for that as well. That's actually, this is an example of a test, making a WebSocket request and waiting for the result. So yeah, WebSockets is covered. You should be able to use that.
Okay, yeah. So again, the question is related to parallel testing. Can we do parallel testing? So I think this was answered earlier.
Yes. The answer is yes. I didn't do a demo. I don't think we have time for that. But number of threads, up to you. If you have more CPUs, just put 10, 20 threads. It's literally exactly as I expect. Yeah, Karate can do parallel testing. Is one of the selling points. We were doing this well from day one, and I have to say it's very surprising to me that most test frameworks actually don't do this well, right? Even Cucumber kind of got it very recently, and even then there are still some gotchas that you need to be careful of. And so Karate, I think you'll be happy. Just check out, look for parallel testing in the documentation. You should be able to find what you need and get up and running quite quickly.
Okay, next question is what type of screenshot does it take in the UI testing? Is it a file or a base 64?
Great question. In fact, I don't fully remember. It is base 64 as far as I know. We obviously delegate to either Selenium's WebDriver framework or Google Chrome CDP in the case that I showed demo for. But we also write it to a file. So if you hook into our reporting, output, you will be able to get a reference to the file if you want it. And I think another way to tell you the answer is that suppose you are getting deep into the API of Karate and you're trying to customize the reports, you will get a byte stream, which is base 64. So yeah, short answer, it is base 64.
Okay, so do you use a library like Selenium in the UI test, or do you create any library to touch the browser or the HTML interface?
Great question again. The answer is we wrote our own WebDriver implementation. We do not use Selenium at all. That's for the WebDriver side of things. And if I can bring up my slides, if you see this slide, yeah, there you go. You see that we wrote this WebDriver adapter that's completely Karate, and we don't depend on Selenium. We wrote the Chrome option. And some of you may have heard Playwright is actually a big, certainly came out of nowhere, and they are doing quite well. We even support that. It's again, that is also one of the experimental things. But again, we feel confident as the Karate project because we have all these three different options. So no matter whether you want to do Selenium style tests in a sense, or if you want to use WebDriver, right, Chrome driver or Gecko driver, whatever you're used to, you can with Karate, but you can have the confidence that you can actually switch your existing test without changes to any other abstraction. You can use Chrome or even Playwright with once it becomes mature. So that's the answer. We don't use Selenium libraries. That's a short answer to your question.
Okay, let's again one more question related to mobile app performance testing. Does Karate supports? Yeah, I think we have got an answer for that.
Yeah, but I think the question is whether we do performance testing on mobile. Certainly not. You can definitely performance test any API server that the mobile application is depending on, but up to you to how to take that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the next question is how to run API tests in parallel.
Yeah, I think we can move on. We've covered that.
Yeah, we covered that. Yeah. So again, the question is related to Karate versus REST assured for API testing. So yeah, you showed us the difference how the API REST assured varies from Karate. So that is again covered. So our next question is Peter, thanks for a great presentation. Currently, I use Karate for API and performance testing. Hopefully, Karate more powerful testing framework in the future. So they're thanking you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, next is how to debug Karate UI test with breakpoints in the Intel IG, sorry.
Yeah, short answer is no. The debug support specifically that we showed you works only in Visual Studio Code, right? We hope, by the way, there is an open feature request on IntelliJ's site that people have asked for Karate support to be natively part of IntelliJ. You may want to go and put your vote in that ticket or issue, but I certainly don't have the bandwidth to do that. It's a very big undertaking, but if you can step forward and help us, nothing like it. But no IntelliJ, only Visual Studio Code. That's the short answer to your question.
Okay, so they're asking, do we have any training program?
No, but there are plenty of videos on YouTube if you go and search. But I know that there are a couple of Udemy courses. There's one I specifically think is a good one, which talks about Karate Gatling integration. So you can look for Karate DSL from zero to hero. There's one Udemy course which you may want to check out. But there are plenty of content on YouTube. Just do a search, you'll get a lot straight away.
Okay, how to integrate CI/CD if there is no build tool like Maven or Gradle?
Yeah, great. I don't want to spend too much time on that. The short answer is that because Karate is based on Maven by default, right? If you are a Java project, Karate is just like, if you know how to run JUnit, Karate is the same, right? The second part of the answer to your question is that because Karate is able to export industry standard formats like the JUnit XML or the Cucumber JSON, which is what all CI/CD systems typically recognize and use to determine whether the suite is passed or failed and all that, and give you the reports. That's how it works. Again, if you have questions, look at the documentation or ask a question on Stack Overflow, and I think you'll get your answer pretty quickly.
Okay. Next question is how do I start? I mean, what should be my first step for starting? What should be the language that I should learn?
Okay, yeah, that's a what, Karate is definitely, if you want to look at the source code of Karate, you can look at it. It's on GitHub. But specifically trying to answer your question is, remember, Karate is not Java or any typical programming language. It's been deliberately designed to be very simple, even to the extent that if you don't have any programming knowledge, you can get up and running with it relatively quickly. So I don't think you need to worry about if this. That's what I have to say. If your intention is just to be productive with Karate, right, and your intention is to be able to use Karate, and your primary role is to go and test APIs or maybe even UIs, just dive into Karate. It should be quite simple, and if needed, just look at one or two tutorials or look at our documentation, and I think that's all I can think of, to be honest.
So can UI performance testing be done using Karate?
Again, no, because that is a very different big area. But if you are able to take all the requests that that your UI is going to make, which will be API calls, right? If you think about it, right? But finally, everything's a get or a put, right? Which is APIs. And Karate is very good at this whole get put business. if you're able to put that sequence of gets and puts and posts and deletes in a karate script, which would be actually quite easy, you know what, you have a UI performance test, right? Because if your intention is to test the load on the server, if many people are using the UI, you can do that. But if you're talking about, hey, can your UI JavaScript performance and what happens in the browser, probably we are not. But I just want to say that this is an area where I think you can contribute, because Karate has an excellent integration with Chrome. We are actually able to get all the data about whatever is happening in Chrome, which includes how much time it took for JavaScript to render, how much time did it take for the DOM to load, and so on, which is an important area of UI performance. So if you're looking for those, you should be able to actually use Karate to get those kind of reports. It needs a little bit of investigation. I suggest you should do it. I've been looking for someone to step forward, actually help us, write a blog post on that or something. So that is my answer for UI performance.
Okay, next is, can we run multiple scenarios with the same set of examples?
The answer is yes. I already showed you data-driven testing, which is, I think, the direct answer to your question. And the second answer is interesting. If you use Gatling, you can run the same scenario hundreds and thousands of times, right, for performance testing. So I think the answer is a big yes.
Does it support Angular applications to test?
It does. Again, the answer is that Karate doesn't care about what technology you use. It just looks at HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And I know why people ask this question, because there used to be a protractor, which is now kind of a dead project, right? And the only thing that protractor does, which is it just makes it a little easier for you to go and access Angular IDs. That's it, right? Which is nothing, but you should be able to. The alternative is that if your testing framework, and Karate supports this, if your testing framework is able to easily allow you to make a DOM JavaScript execution, which is to get a reference to a DOM node, which is based on an Angular ID. That's all you need. You have all those options in Karate. It's actually much simpler than other frameworks. For example, I definitely will bash Selenium once in a while, because I write a competing framework. But in Selenium, you have something like the JavaScript executor, which is very, very hard and convoluted if you want to just run some JavaScript on the DOM. Take a look at Karate's documentation. Doing that kind of stuff is really easy. So what I recommend for people who need to test Angular applications is that you just need to write this reusable utility. And by the way, Karate has this amazing story for reuse. You can reuse features, you can reuse JavaScript, and load them one time and reuse them in all your feature files. So you just need to write this one reusable function, which is able to do just this, which is given Angular ID, give me the DOM element, and then it's just a piece of cake, to be honest. So I think the answer is yes, but I leave it to you to actually go and actually try this out.
Okay, so can we integrate Karate with Jira?
Yes, remember I hinted earlier about that we have hooks and lifecycle events that you can use, and people are using this currently for not just Jira integration, but to integrate with external reporting server products. So I think the answer is yes. It does require you to do some investigation and work. So look forward to that.
Okay, so next question is, yes, exactly. There are questions still coming in. So how does someone new to automation get started with Karate, or use it as a supplement to their manual testing efforts?
Yeah, great question. I think if you're completely new to automation, again, my recommendation is that you use the zip release, which I showed you earlier in the presentation. If you just search for Karate zip release, and remember, the selling point is that you just download one executable. You just need very minimum of a prerequisite, which 90% of the time is already there on your system, which is the Java runtime, not the JDK. And then, the second thing, install Visual Studio Code, and then, you can just run tests. And then it's a matter of you looking at the documentation, right? And I think one of the good things about Karate is that if you're completely new to even programming, I personally believe, and I could be completely biased here, of course, right? So I really believe that Karate is a very good way for you to actually enter, be gently escorted into the world of programming, because you start out very simple, but Karate is willing to flex, right? Karate, you saw, right? If you go to extremes, Karate can actually do Java, JavaScript, you can do reuse, you can actually write functions, you can actually loop. And it can, the good thing about Karate is there's no limit, right? It depends on you. If you flex, Karate will flex along with you, which I think is one of the things that sets Karate apart from other, competing tools and frameworks. So Hopefully that helps. Short answer is just get started. Use the zip release if you are not a programmer, and there's plenty of resources. And finally, we get stuck. Ask a question on Stack Overflow.
Because actually there are many more questions. So do you want to take us that now, or or do you want them to drop an email so that we can coordinate that to you? Because it's like little late, time is little ahead, so I wanted to check with you.
We can stay on for 5 more minutes, so we can do this rapid fire and see.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there's one more question related to supporting of Angular applications in UI. I think you answered that question earlier. Yeah, next is UI automation integrated with cloud like Browse Stack.
I think I understand the question. It means can you call a remote Selenium server or a remote Selenium grid kind of thing? The answer is yes. Again, search Stack Overflow, you will get your answer. Because the short answer is because Karate does try its best to support some W3C specifications. For example, the WebDriver protocol. This is actually possible. People are able to use Browser Stack. People are able to use Amazon's device farm. I forgot the other things, but yeah, this is what you're asking for is actually possible.
Okay. Does Karate integrate with other test management tools, and how does it help to manage the traceability back to say the requirements?
Yeah, I'll answer the traceability question first. The short answer is that you can write tags, and right. So if you have tags, I don't want to show you the examples here, but you may have seen some scenarios having tags on top of them. I don't have an example here, but I've seen many teams write tags, and then using those tags, for example, you can put Jira IDs into the tags, and then you can get a report of saying what tests failed and which tags they belong to, and you can get a report by tags and all that. So, for example, yeah, there are no tags here, but if I click this, yeah, it's not working here because I closed it. Yeah, that's one. And then the other thing, I think I already talked about whether Karate can integrate with third-party tools, and the answer is yes. There are some APIs. If you know Java code, you'll need to get into that. So I think it's all possible. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Okay. Can we improve the report in case of many tests in one feature?
Well, it depends on what you mean by improve. So by all means, I feel the reports are quite good. Of course, I spent a lot of time on them, so I'm terribly biased. But I think the answer to you is that the good news is that the latest version of Karate, which is 1.01 or something, you can, and this is very new. There is not much documentation on this. You can write a custom report, and it's very easy. There is an HTML templating feature that we've actually invented in Karate in a sense, right? There is one particular Stack Overflow answer that goes into detail. If you have trouble finding it, let me know. But if you do a search on Stack Overflow for custom reports or something like that, you're going to get this straight away. So short answer to your question, if you have this very specific need that you don't like Karate's reports and you want to make it into some other shape with more colors and more graphs and all that, by all means, understand how to write a custom report, which shouldn't take you much time, and it's just going to work.
Okay. Does it also take the screenshot of the headless browser testing?
It does. Screenshots are possible, videos are not. So that's the short answer to that question.
Okay. But for performance testing, do you have suggestions or recommendations for the assertions? Maybe like you just assert the status code, or maybe complicated assertions.
Well, yeah. So this question is again one of my big triggers, right? The reason I recommend that Karate should be used instead of tools like typical performance tests, like testing tools like JMeter or Gatling and all that, because it's very, very hard to do these assertions in those kind of tools, right? You have to spend a lot of time writing lines of code and using Scala if it's Gatling. And I want to repeat this again, which Karate is really, really good at assertions. Let me just leave you with this part of the documentation, which is, let me show you fuzzy matching. There it is. Been a while since I looked at this, but yeah, I just want to show you this, that there's a whole, you can really get deep into how you do assertions, right? No matter how badly nested or complications are there in your JSON payloads, you can do this. And remember, karate, and once you do this for karate, which is to answer your question, and then you use that for a performance test, you can be really confident that what you're doing is that even when your server is being hit by tremendous load, but all your responses are coming back with the correct data, right? And I see this mistake made in many teams, many companies, and many testing frameworks or test suites, which is teams will just check for 200 OK and then move on. And this is one of the worst things you can do as someone testing an API. And most testing frameworks really don't focus on that. I believe karate does. So hopefully that answer, gives you some insight into the way, at least how I think about that particular question.
Okay, yeah. So the last question for the day is Karate Apache plugin available in NPM, the node repository?
Yeah, the answer is no, because I think the question is whether karate is available as a JavaScript library and which you can just do an NPM and pull into your project. No, karate is legitimately a Java project. But that said, right, there are plenty. Remember, I started this presentation talking about Visual Studio Code, which is this stuff that anybody can use. It doesn't care whether you're using Java. It's just an executable. And there are many teams who are on Node.js or in Python or Ruby or C#, even JavaScript. Yeah, Node.js, JavaScript, who use Visual Studio Code, just use karate as an executable and just don't worry, because remember, the whole point of HTTP and APIs is that the technology of the server shouldn't matter. You are just testing plain text over HTTP. So short answer, no Node library, but many teams that are on Node.js are using karate very successfully, and I just want to call that out.
Okay, there are multiple others, thank you notes flowing in, but because of the time crunch, I'm not able to read the entire thank you notes. So thank you, Peter. It was very comprehensive product explainer. After listening to your webinar, I think it's apt that karate has nearly 5,000 GitHub stars and 1,300 GitHub folks. So I'm sure that the number is going to be increasing drastically in future. So, and now we understand why it is, under the job listings now as a desired skill. So this was one of the best webinar we could say, with high level of interest and participation from the audience. I'm sure audience, even you had a wonderful session today, and request you to contribute to this Made in India test automation framework. Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, and yeah, I enjoyed all the questions and it was great. Really, thank you for setting this up, Trident and the organizers. And if you have questions about karate, you know how to find me. All the best in all your future testing endeavors to everyone attending this call. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, audience. Thank you all for your time. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.